I'm Sadie Merriman, 36 years old. I once believed that if I stayed quiet enough, patient enough, and never caused trouble, they would eventually turn and see me. But then I received a yellow envelope, my name crossed out from the inheritance in steady blue ink. You know this isn't personal, right? And I understood some people don't need you to fall in order to reject you. They only need you to stand still long enough to become the shadow behind them. I never liked how my name looked in cursive, too many loops to be trusted. I found the envelope on the kitchen table. Not sealed, not addressed, just sitting there as if it had placed itself. My last name, Whitlow, was printed in small serif font at the top corner of the document, inside nothing more. No greeting, no dear. No signature at the bottom either, just a typed line. Effective January 1st, all interest and custodial authority associated with parcel ID 47B19 shall transfer to Ms. Stephanie Whitlow. There wasn't a mistake. It was my grandmother's cabin, the one with the chipped stone steps and the broken piano pedal. The one she used to call my place when she wanted to make my mother angry. I refolded the letter slowly. The paper had a slight linen grain that caught at my fingertips. Someone had spent real money having this printed. I didn't text anyone. I just sat there for a moment, with one hand resting on the paper, like if I held it long enough it might explain itself. The next moment, I remember clearly a group photo posted on Stephanie's story. A long table lined with silverware and matching sweaters. 12 faces smiling, all turned slightly inward as if someone had told them where the center was. I was not in the picture. I was not in the room. The caption read, "Annual Whitlow Kick-Off Brunch. Stronger than ever." Beneath it, a single comment from Claire. So beautiful to see the whole family together. That word, whole, held weight. The phone buzzed once more. A message from Margaret, my mother, Chuyen, Homne, La Noibo. Con Hum Can Den. She rarely used Vietnamese in writing, only when she wanted something to sound final. Like policy. Another ping followed. This one, from Claire, my brother's wife. Don't make this harder for everyone, Sadie. This was agreed upon months ago. No greeting. No context. Only the assumption that I should already understand. I opened my banking app, not because I expected anything to change, but because something in me itched. A thread pulled too tight. The balance hadn't dropped. Not really. But the linked beneficiary account was no longer mine. The notes line, which used to read Grandma's Winter Reserve, now said, "Transferred to S. Whitlow, custodian, confirmed." There was no record of a conversation, no request, just a quiet deletion. I stood up, walked to the kitchen and made tea without sugar, without honey, just water and leaves. The mug I used was chipped on the rim, an old promotional one from a conference I never attended. I remembered finding it in the office kitchen years ago and quietly deciding to bring it home. The crack caught against my lip as I drank. My fingers tapped against the ceramic 3 times, not for rhythm, for confirmation that I was still here. I pulled the envelope back toward me and turned it over again. It smelled faintly of ink and old linen, the kind of scent that doesn't belong in a house like this. My name was nowhere on it, but the absence pressed louder than if it had been crossed out in red. I scrolled through the group photo again. Stephanie was sitting in my grandmother's chair, elbows propped, head tilted just enough. Her dress was pale cream, the kind with hidden zippers and structured collars. She had always looked like the kind of woman someone else would assume was in charge. I clicked on her profile. Nothing mentioned the cabin, not directly, just photos from the porch, a view from the lake, and a caption, "Finding my place, finally." I stared longer than I meant to. Then I heard her voice in my head, casual and bored. Well, maybe Grandma just didn't want to complicate things. Not cruel, just clipped, as if fairness was too dense to unpack. I placed the phone face down. The email notification popped up on my laptop before I could close the screen. From the law office of Brooks, Denning and Fields. Subject change of ownership confirmation, per family agreement. That word again, agreement. Not signature, not consent, just the assumption that silence was yes. There had been no meeting, no call, not even a forwarded document for review. They had simply waited long enough for my stillness to be reinterpreted. I stood at the counter and folded the paper back into thirds. The creases didn't match the original fold lines. I didn't tear it. I didn't call anyone. I didn't walk upstairs. Instead, I opened the bottom drawer, the one where I kept things I didn't want to think about, but wasn't ready to throw away. Inside was a small velvet box I hadn't opened in years. Not a ring. Just a button. It had belonged to my grandmother's old cardigan, one of the wooden ones that never matched anything, but always smelled like soap. She used to say the thread was more honest than most people. I kept the button not because it meant anything in particular, but because it had once been sewn on by her hands. It had been part of something whole. I closed the drawer without removing it. No one called that night. No missed messages. No follow-ups. Even the phone seemed to understand that something had finished. I made another cup of tea using the chipped mug again. I didn't check the water temperature. I didn't watch the steeping time. The house was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the quiet of something rearranged without your knowledge and then locked behind a door you didn't realize you'd left open. And still I didn't knock, because maybe I had always been standing outside, because maybe the door was never opened to begin with. I used to think that if I didn't cause trouble, they'd remember to keep a seat for me. My college decision wasn't a rebellion. I didn't announce it at dinner or scribble it into notebooks with dramatic conviction. I just circled applied arts on the form and placed it quietly in the mail. When the acceptance arrived, I folded the letter 3 times and tucked it behind the coffee canister. It stayed there for 6 days. The night Stephanie brought home her mock trial trophy, Margaret looked at her with both hands clasped beneath her chin. "You were made for more than just pretty things," she said, not unkindly. My name didn't come up. At the graduation brunch, I wore a plain navy dress and sat near the end of the table. Someone toasted Ben's new job in Chicago, then Stephanie's law internship. No one asked what I'd be doing. When the check came, I paid for mine before they could offer. Later that week, I bought a plain journal from the bookstore downtown and wrote at the top of the first page, "Be useful, not visible." I thought maybe that was the safer way. When Helen's hands began trembling, I was the one who noticed the glass bowls were stacked sideways in the cabinet, the one who found spoons in the sock drawer. I visited twice a week, then 3, then every day. The others came on holidays and left with Tupperware. I labeled light switches. I arranged her sweaters by warmth. Once I caught her whispering to the potted plant near the window. Margaret came by unexpectedly and saw me cutting a baked potato into small pieces. "You're not a nurse," she said. "You're making this into something it's not." But I kept going. Because Helen smiled when I entered the room. Because she called me by my name even when she couldn't recall what day it was. I brought her cinnamon tea every Tuesday. She liked it. Warm, not hot, no sugar. She'd cup her hands around the mug like it was made of breath. No one remembered to refill her prescriptions that spring. I drove across town and waited in line with her insurance card. The woman behind the counter smiled when she handed me the bag. "Bless you," she whispered. "You're a good granddaughter." That word landed in my ribs like a forgotten coat button. At home, no one mentioned Helen unless she was in the hospital. Margaret once said she wouldn't have needed so much help if she'd just moved into assisted living like we suggested. I ironed her cardigans slow and flat, then placed them in the drawer by color. Not because she'd asked, but because it made the mornings easier for her. No one saw that drawer. I still remember Thanksgiving the year the oven broke. I brought my own roasted vegetables in a thrifted casserole dish. Stephanie walked in with a catered tray of cranberry brie bites wrapped in glossy foil. Claire unwrapped it and said, "Now that looks like effort." The tray disappeared by the end of the night. My vegetables were still covered untouched. Someone put them in the fridge without asking. At Christmas, I brought gifts for the kids, hand-painted puzzles with their initials carved in. Claire opened the bag, blinked once, then leaned over to Stephanie. "So thoughtful," she whispered. Did she make these, or find them at a market I pretended not to hear? I wrapped each puzzle in recycled paper and twine. That year, the kids got iPads from their parents. Mine were left behind in the dining room. Ben told me once while carving ham, "You make everything so specific." It's not bad, just a little much. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. I remember the card I painted for Margaret's birthday, a single calla lily what on soft grey. I included a note inside, wishing you softness in the year ahead. She texted me 2 days later. "Thank you. Stephanie needs help with a slide deck. Can you call her tonight?" I didn't reply. There was a Sunday I brought home, a newspaper clipping. A small column in the back of the arts section titled "Local Teacher Helps Women Restore Broken China." It had a photo of me hunched over a table, showing an elderly student how to press gold leaf into a cracked saucer. I left the clipping on the kitchen counter just beside the fruit bowl. At dinner, Ben reached for an orange and picked up the clipping. "Huh," he said. "Didn't know you were still doing that class." Claire leaned over his shoulder. "You look tired in this. Maybe it's the lighting." I cleared the plates without saying anything. When I came back, the clipping was gone. Later, I found it in the recycling bin, folded in half. There's a frame that still hangs in the hallway, an old photo of all of us taken 3 winters ago. The glass cracked during a move, and someone patched it with a clear sticker. The sticker landed directly over my face. No one fixed it. No one mentioned it. I once offered to reframe it. "It's fine the way it is," my father said. "Don't turn everything into a project." I left it alone. When Stephanie was between jobs, I referred her to 3 clients I couldn't take. I'd done logos for each of them. She sent one back a week later, almost identical to my original draft. "They loved it," she texted. Said I really understood their tone. I wrote "glad to hear" and hit send. Then I deleted the file from my laptop. One evening, I overheard Margaret on the phone in the living room. "She's always been delicate," she said. "Not fragile, just not the type you build around." The fire crackled once in the background. She never said my name. I used to keep a small box in my closet full of things I never told anyone about: ink-stained gloves from a summer internship, a Polaroid of Helen holding a cracked plate. I'd repaired the stub from my first solo art exhibit. It wasn't well attended, but I'd lit candles that night and stood beside my work anyway. No one from the family came. The next day, Margaret said, "Art is fine for people who can afford it." "I just worry you'll always be trying to turn hobbies into survival." Stephanie laughed. Sadie's like one of those people who opens a shop that closes in 6 months, but says it was therapeutic. I nodded. I didn't remind them I'd never asked for investment. I didn't bring up the money I'd saved from freelance contracts. I just stopped inviting them. I still have Helen's voicemail on my phone, the last one she left, before her memory slipped entirely. Sadie. I don't always say it right, but you make the quiet things beautiful. Don't let them take that from you. Some days I play it, some days I don't. There's a hairline crack in the frame in the hallway. You can see the outline of my eye now, peeking from beneath the sticker. It looks like a ghost learning how to stay. I haven't repaired it, because maybe they don't see it, and maybe they do. I learned early that applause has direction, and I was always standing behind it. They gave Stephanie the lead role in the 2nd grade Thanksgiving play. She played the girl who saved the village with a basket of seeds. I was assigned to stand beside her and hold the sign that said autumn. I had painted it the night before with yellow watercolor and a brush with only 4 working bristles. Margaret brought roses to the show. Not for me. Afterward, outside the auditorium, she handed Stephanie the bouquet and fixed a curl of her hair. You were glowing up there, absolutely radiant. Then turning to me without pause, and you looked sweet. It's important to support the main story. The sign I had made was left on the floor near the gym mats. I picked it up when no one was looking, folded it twice and slipped it under my coat. I kept it for years. Eventually, the paper softened into a blur of yellow and fingerprints. My high school graduation card from Margaret arrived a day late. The envelope was cream with a raised monogram, the kind she reserved for formal occasions. I opened it slowly, wanting to preserve the edge. Inside, "To our dear Sandy," always cheering from the side. "You're appreciated more than you know." There was no money, no correction, just a looping signature in blue ink, a curl of my mother's name trailing into the white space. I placed it on my desk and stared at the misspelled name until it stopped looking like a mistake and more like a habit. During a family dinner 3 Thanksgivings ago, Stephanie brought out a set of ceramic bowls, cream glazed with cobalt spirals, and placed them on the table like a gift. "I've been working on this series for months," she said, arranging them carefully. Inspired by quiet mornings, they looked exactly like the prototypes I had discarded the previous spring. Claire held one up. "They're so refined. Like, finally someone turned all that earthy stuff into something elegant." Ben nodded. She really nailed it. Clean lines. Commercial, but still original. I folded my napkin in half. No one looked my way. That night, while washing the dishes, I noticed one of the bowls had a faint fingerprint pressed under the glaze mine. I remembered that particular slip of clay. The glaze had run during firing, and I'd set it aside as flawed. Stephanie must have picked it from the reject shelf at the studio without asking. I didn't say anything. The next morning, she posted a photo of the set online with the caption, "My signature line finally launched." My name wasn't tagged. Once while passing the hallway, I overheard Margaret on the phone. "Sadie has a soft heart. But Stephanie, she makes things happen." There was a pause. Intentions are fine, but results are what count. I stood still until her voice blended into the clicking of the stovetop. The ceramic bowl I made for her birthday 2 years ago, hand-thrown deep indigo, carved with an intricate vine pattern, now sits in the downstairs bathroom. It holds used bars of soap, their edges dried and cracking. A ring of residue clings to the bottom. She once gestured toward it when a guest complimented the decor. Oh, that Sadie's little project. She makes things like that sometimes. No mention of the hours I spent smoothing the rim or blending the glaze by hand. Just a nod to it being there. One winter, I brought a framed drawing of Helen to the holiday exchange. It was simple ink on cold press paper, her hands resting on a teacup. Stephanie unwrapped it and blinked. It's sweet, she said, glancing around. Though a candle would have been more useful. She set it aside and reached for another box. Later, I saw the drawing leaned against the recycling bin, still in its frame, untouched. At a Sunday brunch, my father once turned to me between bites of toast and murmured, "You've always had depth, Sadie, but Stephanie, well, she carries momentum." I nodded. I didn't ask what I carried. There's a drawer in the hallway console filled with extra utensils and misfit keys. One of the spoons is engraved faintly with the letter S. It was a test piece I made in a metal workshop years ago, uneven but intentional. I had given it to Margaret as a joke, a nod to my clumsy start in silversmithing. She laughed and tossed it into the drawer. "It's cute," she said. "One day maybe it'll balance right." The spoon is still there years later, bent, slightly tarnished at the neck. It hasn't moved. I once heard Claire describe me to a new neighbour as the artsy one, quiet, thoughtful, you know. Background, energy. I turned back to the sink, let the water run over my hands until they numbed. On Stephanie's wedding day, I held her veil while she retouched her lipstick. In the bridal suite, surrounded by blush satin and white roses, she looked at me through the mirror and said, "Don't fuss too much. Okay, you'll draw attention." I nodded. I stood in the back row during photos. Later, I cropped myself out of the group shot before printing a copy for my own fridge. The original still hangs in their foyer. I have a box under my bed filled with things that were once meant to be shared. A draft of a short essay Helen once encouraged me to publish, a pressed flower from a trip I took alone, a sketch of the kitchen as it looked when no one else was home. None of it was ever asked for. None of it was ever missed. The bowl in the bathroom still sits there. Sometimes I rinse it when I visit, not to clean it, just to feel the glaze under my palm. Because even the things left behind still remember the hands that shaped them. I never meant to be noticed. That was the only thing I did without intention. The rain had started before I left the grocery store. Thin, persistent, the kind that seeps through sleeves and shoelaces without ceremony. I'd forgotten my umbrella, but it didn't seem worth turning back for. I loaded the bags into the trunk and sat behind the wheel longer than necessary, watching droplets settle and drift along the windshield like conversations never had. She was by the mailbox, not moving. Her coat was too thin, a faded green with a hem that had lost its stitching. She didn't look around, just stood there, her hands cupped awkwardly beneath her chest, as if cradling a bar. I opened the car door and walked over, no plan, no purpose beyond proximity. Her shoulders trembled beneath the weight of stillness. I took off my hoodie and wrapped it around her. The sleeves were long, damp at the cuffs. "I just wanted to get to the corner," she said. Her voice almost folded inside itself. I didn't tell her to explain. I didn't tell her to try harder. We reached the porch steps. I guided her up slowly. Her shoes made a soft squish against the wood. She smelled faintly of something old but clean, like dried roses left in books. The front door creaked. Margaret's voice came before her silhouette. "For God's sake, Sadie, not again." The light from the entryway cut across the porch like a verdict. Stephanie stepped into it, heels clicking against the tile. She probably faked it. She murmured eyes not even pretending. Claire followed, arms crossed. You really can't tell the difference between kindness and codependency, can you? I helped the woman sit. Her fingers trembled as she clasped the edge of the swing. I crouched beside her. My name's Sadie, I said quietly. She nodded once. Ruth. Margaret sighed loudly, turning back inside. She better not sue. I called the non-emergency number and gave the address. The dispatcher's voice was calm, unconcerned. I wondered what box they were checking beside my name. Ruth rested her palm over mine briefly, then withdrew. You don't need to wait. I'm already here. We said nothing else. The porch boards groaned beneath us, the rain pressing down in soft repetition. 20 minutes passed, then headlights rounded the cul-de-sac. Not a patrol car, not a service van. A sleek black Lincoln pulled to the curb without hesitation. The driver stepped out with measured efficiency umbrella already open. He approached calm but direct. Ms. Merriman, he said. Ruth rose slowly. She leaned into his arm, not because she was weak, but because she had chosen to let someone hold her weight. Before stepping away, she squeezed my hand once. Thank you. The door shut behind her with a soft finality. I didn't move. Inside the house, the fridge hummed. Plastic bags crinkled. Margaret was wiping the counter in circles. Well, she started. I suppose you'll want to write about this now. Maybe post some thoughtful little caption I put the milk away. The noise of the door closing echoed louder than her words. 30 minutes later, I heard them. Engines, not roaring measured, deliberate. One by one, 9 black SUVs lined the street. The porch lights flickered slightly from the movement outside. Ben stood frozen near the door. Stephanie's phone slid slowly from her hand to her purse. Claire whispered, What the hell did you do? The lead vehicle's door opened. A tall man in a tailored grey coat stepped forward with a clipboard. Miss Sadie Whitlow. His voice didn't rise. She'd like a word. I stepped onto the porch. No one followed. Behind me, Margaret's voice cut into the air. You don't have to go. You don't owe her anything. I didn't answer. Inside the SUV it was silent. The seats smelled of leather and lavender. The air was warm but not stifling. Across from me, Ruth sat with her hands folded over a cream-colored clutch. Her coat was dry now, her hair neatly pinned. The woman outside my house no longer existed. You didn't flinch, she said. I watched her hands. They were steady now, not folded out of nervousness, but habit. You didn't ask who I was. You didn't perform kindness. My fingers pressed into the seams of my jeans. I don't do this often, she continued, but when I do, I prefer clarity. She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. Ivory. No logo. No crease. She placed it on the seat between us. I owe you a favor, she said. Real ones aren't owed often. I didn't reach for it. She smiled slightly, not with pleasure, but recognition. Not every transaction needs a price. I looked out the window. My house sat still beneath the porch light. Stephanie leaned against the railing, arms crossed. Margaret stood stiff behind her. They'll tell you it was coincidence, Ruth said. That you got lucky. That I was just testing you. Her voice dropped not louder, just closer. Let them. I didn't lift the envelope. I didn't thank her. I didn't cry. I traced the stitching on the seat with my thumb, then folded my hands into my lap. Some things feel heavier before they're opened, and some names don't need to be spoken to be remembered. I used to think leaving meant slamming something behind you, but some doors never had to move to stay shut. The cardboard box I chose was from the pantry. It once held packets of dried soup and expired couscous. I lined the bottom with an old towel and packed only the things I didn't want them to remember. I had a chipped mug from my first solo show, the sketchbook Helen once touched, but never opened 3 tubes of gouache that had hardened but still looked full from the outside. I folded a sweater over the top. It still smelled like clay. The sleeves had started to fray along the inner seams, and one of the buttons had gone soft with wear. Margaret was in the kitchen, turning the faucet off too hard. Her voice came without pause. "You think this is your moment, don't you? Some fairy tale invitation from a rich old woman who got caught in the rain." She didn't wait for a response. "That's the thing with you, Sadie. You always mistake sympathy for opportunity." I lifted the box gently. My fingers left faint prints on the side panel. She turned then, leaning one hand against the sink. "Kondang tu huina, she saw a girl with a bleeding heart and decided to humor you. That's all this is." I placed the envelope on the counter, the ivory one Ruth had handed me. I didn't open it. I didn't reference it. Margaret's eyes moved to it briefly. "You really think she's going to save you?" I looked at her. Not through her. Just enough. She remembered my name. The silence after that wasn't empty. It just didn't need filling. In the hallway, Claire's voice floated from the guest room. "She's acting like she's being chosen for something. It's kind of pathetic." Stephanie's tone followed sharper. "Ruth's not family. She doesn't owe Sadie anything. Neither do we." I didn't stop to listen longer. They weren't hiding the conversation. They never needed to. The front door creaked when I opened it. The same sound it had made every morning since I was 12, when I used to leave for school 15 minutes early, just to walk alone. I never fixed the hinge. The brass key Ruth gave me had no tag, no address. It sat heavy in my palm, its edges warm from my skin. I looped a thin chain through it and wore it around my neck. Not for show, not for luck. Just so I wouldn't forget I'd been given something without having to ask. The studio sat on a quiet street between a coin laundry and a consignment bookstore. The windows were clouded. Dust clung to the inside of the glass like fog that had forgotten how to leave. I unlocked the front door with a soft click. The sound wasn't dramatic. Inside there was nothing to prove. The light switches stuck slightly. The floor creaked beneath my step. I didn't turn on any music. I didn't move quickly. A paint-stained stool rested in the corner. I ran my finger along its edge and left a trail in the dust. There was no welcome basket, no list of instructions, only the space. And me. And the key. A message came through as I stood near the sink, holding a glass that hadn't been used in years. "Stephanie. You left your charger. Mom said she's not mailing it." Then another. "Also, can you not make a big thing out of this? We're dealing with enough right now." I turned the phone face down on the counter. I pulled my coat tighter. The collar had a small tear I'd stitched by hand last month. The thread was uneven, slightly too bright, but it held. There were still papers in my pocket. Grocery receipts, a list of things I meant to get but never did honey duct tape masking fluid. I unfolded the list slowly and laid it beside the sink. The faucets didn't work yet. The smell of dust hadn't lifted, but the air wasn't heavy. I found a hook on the wall just behind the door. It was brass, barely holding on loose at the screws. I hung the chain and key there for a moment, just to look at it from a distance. It didn't gleam. It didn't declare itself. It just existed. Like permission. I didn't write back. I didn't leave a note. I didn't announce I was gone. And no one asked if I had. Because sometimes Silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the space left behind when nothing is expected of you anymore. The floor creaked like it had a memory of footsteps that didn't belong to me. I laid the blanket down anyway. One corner curled in on itself, stubborn, like it didn't yet believe in staying. I used the coat as a pillow, not because it was soft, but because it was mine. The zipper stuck at the middle, and the inside seam had unraveled. I tucked it under my neck and looked at the ceiling for a long time. The paint above had cracked in 2 places, like something had stretched too far and decided not to return. The only light came from a small desk lamp I'd found under the counter. The cord bent awkwardly, and the switch sparked when I turned it. I left it on. The first night didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like waiting for someone to notice the air had shifted. I didn't unpack much. I kept the box near the door half open. The sketchbook lay on top pages, fanned slightly from moisture it had collected over the years. The pencil tucked inside still bore my teeth marks from college. At some point, the quiet became thicker than sound, the kind that doesn't ring, it just presses. By morning, the air had cooled enough to feel like breath on my arms. I stood slowly, bones tight from the floor. I moved carefully, not because I was fragile, but because the space didn't yet know me. The dust on the windows turned light into a kind of forgiveness, muted and soft. I wiped the sill with the sleeve of my shirt. The grey stain left behind looked like a thumbprint I didn't want to clean. I opened the drawer of the old desk and found a folded slip of paper wedged beneath a yellowed receipt. The handwriting wasn't rushed. Don't forget to dream in this place. No punctuation. Just that. I placed the note against the wall, pinned with a bent paperclip I'd found on the floor. I didn't need it to inspire. I needed it to remind. By noon, my hands were streaked with lines of grit and forgotten paint. I didn't scrub the surfaces clean. I just cleared enough space to sit. There were smudges on the wall that didn't come from me, a shoe mark near the door, a fingerprint near the switch. I didn't erase them. Darlene arrived on the 3rd day. She didn't knock hard, just enough. She held a paper bag in one hand and a flashlight in the other. This one still works. I checked. Then, placing the bag down, there's cornbread. Don't reheat it in that microwave unless you want to start over from scratch. She wore a visor and smelled faintly of talcum powder, the kind that lingers more in the air than on skin. I've lived next door 38 years. If you ever need a socket wrench or silence knock twice. Then she walked away. I didn't ask how she knew I was here. The microwave door didn't close properly. I left the cornbread wrapped in a towel and ate it cold. At night, I wiped down the counter, slowly tracing circles with a damp cloth that had once been part of a curtain. The threads unraveled slightly at the corners. I didn't sleep well, but not from noise. My mind kept rebuilding the room differently, what color the shelves could be where light might land best in winter. I imagined hooks on the wall for aprons, not coats. I imagined someone else sitting at the edge of the table, shaping clay, without speaking. I found an old radio near the back door. The antenna was bent, but it worked if I leaned it against the window frame. A song came through faintly, no lyrics, just keys. I didn't hum along. I let it pass through. There were cracks in the far wall, long hairline, almost delicate. I placed my hand against one and felt how dry the plaster was. I didn't reach for spackle. I just rested my palm there, like pressing into a scar that no longer hurt, but still shaped the skin around it. Stephanie sent a message that week. One line. Did you tell her anything about me? I deleted it before the screen locked. There was no Wi-Fi. The hot water worked only if the faucet was turned twice in opposite directions. The toilet had to be flushed with a pitcher. Still, I didn't leave. In the evenings, I sat on the floor with the sketchbook open beside me and made a list of things that needed fixing, not to rush, just to see what waited. A loose hinge, a missing light cover, a drawer that stuck. I didn't rank them. Each note reminded me that neglect can be named without being accused. I didn't tell anyone I was sleeping on the floor. I didn't explain the dust or the way the ceiling groaned at 3 a.m. I didn't take photos of the progress. I folded the coat again each morning, laid it beside the key on the windowsill, and let the day begin without deciding what it should look like. No one called. No one asked. I swept the floor again anyway, not to clean, but to remember the shape of the space. And slowly, the silence began to feel less like something missing, and more like something I chose. Some people only remember you when forgetting you becomes inconvenient. The first message came just after the new windows were measured. It was short, a screenshot of a city newsletter clipped at the edge with a circle drawn around my name in digital ink. No greeting. Stephanie, heard you're on some funding list. What exactly did you tell Ruth? I didn't answer. I moved the message into a folder I'd labeled Misc and opened a jar of glaze that had sealed itself shut from disuse. By the end of the week, the voicemails began. Claire. Just a heads up, Martin's name might be tied to that downtown commission. I'm sure you wouldn't want something from the past to complicate things for everyone. I played that one twice, not because I needed clarity, but because I didn't believe I had heard it right the first time. I didn't save it. The floors in the gallery still creaked even after the cleaning. I liked the sound. It reminded me of unfinished things. Honest things. Margaret sent a voice note next. The tone was light, like someone adjusting a picture frame while pretending not to notice it's crooked. Sadie. I'm not blaming you, really, I'm not. But just don't let private matters leak into public projects. Martin's been waiting on final approval for weeks, and well, you know how people talk. I let it play in the background while stirring plaster. She didn't ask where I was living. She didn't ask if I had food or heat. She asked for silence. The plaster set slowly. I watched the lines fill like veins returning to a sleeping body. I didn't smooth the ridges. 2 days later, an envelope arrived. Not typed. Handwritten. Stephanie's loopy, practiced cursive curled too carefully. Inside was a folded note on cream paper that smelled faintly of perfume I hadn't worn since I was 21. Mong chi thang kung. De dung lam fin em nua. I held the paper for a long time before tearing it down the center. The sound was small, clean. There was no anger in the act, only precision. I kept the torn halves on the counter until the next morning, then dropped them into a cup of old paint water. The ink bled until the words vanished into one another. No one from my family had asked what I was building. Not one of them had stood in the gallery's hollow center and run a hand across the exposed brick. None of them had carried a ladder or offered a chair or asked what would hang on the walls when the lights were ready. But now they remembered my name because someone else had written it. I repainted the front door with 3 coats of mineral blue. On the second coat, I paused brush still mid-stroke as another message lit up. Stephanie, again. This is going to blow back on you if you're not careful. Ruth doesn't owe you everything. No punctuation, no signature. I deleted it without opening the thread. In the corner of the studio, a ceramic bowl I'd started weeks ago still waited. The edges had dried uneven. One side sloped lower than intended. I didn't reshape it. I placed it near the windowsill where light could catch its floor openly. Darlene brought a thermos one morning. People call more when they can't guess what you'll say. She didn't stay long. The thermos was warm. I drank from it slowly, not to savor, but to have something to hold. By the end of that week, 4 more messages came. 1 from Claire, 1 from Stephanie, again, 2 from numbers I didn't save. Each one dressed as concern. Each one ended with some variation of, "Just don't ruin it for the rest of us." None of them asked how I slept on concrete for the first 3 nights. None asked what it meant to touch the wall where Ruth had written dream. They spoke as if I were a rumor they hoped would stay tame. A headline they couldn't control. I turned the phone off on Thursday. I left it in a drawer with a dead pen, a receipt for wood screws, and the ribbon from my high school honor ceremony. No one had attended. I didn't announce anything. I didn't write back. I didn't forward the messages to Ruth. I knew I didn't need to. The mail came again on Saturday. A card with gold, unmarked sender. Inside, "We're so proud of all you've become. Let us know how we can support." Below it, Claire's signature, trailing off into someone else's pen stroke. I folded it once, not in anger, but in dismissal, and placed it under the wobbly leg of the back shelf. When things are unstable, you use what you're given, even if all it ever was wait. Some things only start to bloom when no one is watching. I didn't announce the opening. No banner, no press release. Just a small note tacked beside the door. "If you need a quiet place to shape something, come in." I wrote it in pencil, erased the last line, and left the smudge. The lock stuck a little when I turned the key each morning. The brass had dulled and I hadn't polished it. I liked the way it caught the light, soft, reluctant, like something that had been touched too many times but was still holding. I painted the back wall myself, not evenly. The brush I used had belonged to Ruth. Her initials were carved into the handle with something sharp too deep for sandpaper to undo. I left them visible. When I dipped it into the tray, her name caught paint before the bristles did. The first class happened before I meant it to. I was arranging the shelves when a boy came in without knocking. He stood by the cracked tile, staring at a bowl that had collapsed inward during firing. His backpack was unzipped. One strap had been tied with a rubber band. I saw the note he mumbled. I pointed to a stool. "No one checks anything here." He molded a cat that didn't have a face. I didn't ask why. On Thursdays, I left the door open past dark. That's when Mrs. Lansing arrived, always in a red coat, and with a limp that made her footsteps sound uneven like an unfinished sentence. She never used the sink, just wiped her hands on an old scarf and left a coin by the windowsill. "I taught elementary art in the 60s, she said once, placing a broken tea saucer on the work table. "They didn't let us show emotion." This one cracked in my drawer the day I retired. I placed it on the shelf beside a bowl that never hardened. The gallery space grew without blueprints. I rearranged displays based on where people lingered. One wall held drawings done in charcoal by hands that shook. Another showed bowls with uneven rims, glaze pooled like forgotten puddles. People brought their own tools. A woman named Elise carried only her mother's rolling pin. It was dented, wrapped with duct tape, and smelled faintly of lavender. She used this when she couldn't sleep. Thought baking calmed the house. She made a plate with no edge, let the clay fall over itself. I gave her no instructions. May Harmon from the city council stopped by in March. Her coat had a rip beneath the left sleeve. She ran her fingers along the wall where fingerprints had smudged the white paint. She looked around without speaking for a while. "No plaques?" she asked. I shook my head. "Good. She left a folder labeled Community Cultural Fund. I didn't open it for 3 days. When I did, a check slipped out. The signature was Ruth's, crooked, unmistakable. Stephanie texted that night. "Heard you got funding. I'm guessing it had nothing to do with merit." I didn't respond. A week later, Claire sent an email titled Image Matters. "Just a reminder to keep things discreet, Sadie. We all know how sensitive family narratives can affect public support." There was no greeting, no closing. I printed it out and folded it into an origami bird. It didn't hold shape. I let it fall into the trash. I began teaching hand-building techniques on Saturdays. Not many rules, just 2. Don't apologize for how it turns out. If you break something, decide whether it stays broken. Lana came with her son, who refused to speak. He tapped clay into thin discs and stacked them until they fell over. Each time he rebuilt them lower. I watched his hands, steady, deliberate. At the end of class, he pressed his stack flat, then carved a small O in the center. He didn't wait for feedback, just left it on the corner shelf. I didn't move it. A woman named Martha brought in a ceramic heart she'd bought from a gift shop. It had shattered during her divorce. She held out the pieces in a brown lunch bag, like she didn't want them to breathe too much. "Can I use these?" she asked. "Only if you don't want them back the same." She glued them onto a tile that never quite dried. The fragments kept sliding off. She added pressure. It cracked. She laughed without smiling. "You ever think some things fall apart on schedule?" The following Monday, I received a postcard. No signature. Just a message: be careful not to over-identify with the underdog. It becomes self-serving. The handwriting was my mother's. I pinned it to the wall behind the sink. Next to it, I placed a chipped coffee mug Ruth had left behind. The handle had broken clean off. I didn't fix it. I put wildflowers in it instead. Each object became its own quiet record. A bowl that listed too far left, a jar that refused to dry properly, a canvas someone abandoned mid-stroke. People offered to buy them. I refused. I wasn't selling beauty. I was keeping witness. One afternoon, a local reporter asked to do a piece on the gallery. I declined. "There's no headline here," I told her. "Just rooms that let people stay without needing to be anyone." The mailbox filled faster. Brochures, jury invitations, tax notices, flyers from local coalitions asking if I wanted to be listed as a creative partner. I didn't reply to any. I did send one envelope to the city council. No cover letter, no promotional photo. Just a clay tile wrapped in wax paper, etched into its back. "Still here." Adira stopped by again in April. She carried a briefcase but didn't open it. Her heels caught on the loose floorboard near the entry. She looked at it for a while before speaking. "You didn't fix that yet?" "No." "Why not?" "It still tells the truth." She walked the perimeter of the room slowly, like reading Braille on the walls. Before leaving, she gestured to the doorframe, where I'd written the word "stay" in pencil. "You always knew how to make silence mean something." I didn't thank her. I turned off the overhead lights after she left and sat on the floor beside the heater that barely worked. In the quiet, I reached for the thin gold ring I wore around my neck. A ring no one in my family had ever asked about. It belonged to a teacher from undergrad who told me once after a critique, "Your work is too gentle, but maybe that's not the flaw you think it is." I traced its edge with my thumb. No one had messaged me in 2 weeks. Even the passive tones had gone still. I didn't delete the old texts. I just stopped rereading them. The studio needed patching. Some of the ceiling tiles were curling. The back door stuck when it rained. The drain in the restroom gurgled when no one used it. I kept a list of repairs in a notebook Ruth had left. On the inside cover, she had written, "Don't finish this too fast. What you fix too soon, you forget too easily." So I didn't rush. I swept. I aired the rooms. I arranged the shelves again, not for symmetry, but for weight. A bowl at the entrance bore a thumbprint I couldn't trace. No one claimed it. I left it there. Not everything needs an origin to be worthy of staying. I never expected the last word to arrive so quietly. The envelope was heavier than it looked. Manila creased at the edges, the adhesive seal smudged as if someone had pressed too long, then changed their mind. My name wasn't handwritten, just printed in a neat, uniform font, a name that no longer felt attached to anything. Martin handed it to me on a Saturday. He didn't step inside. They wanted you to have it. No greeting, no eye contact, the way one passes off a forgotten item left on a bus. I nodded, not in agreement, just to mark that I had heard. He turned and walked back to the car without waiting. I placed the envelope in the drawer beside the broken measuring tape Ruth once used to outline shelf space. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. It had already happened. The message was clear. I was no longer a possibility they had to pretend about. No longer pending. No longer included by oversight. Erased with paperwork, not words. I made tea, let the water cool too long, then drank it anyway. I ran my fingers along the rim of a mug. Someone else had made a first attempt, wobbly and thin-walled. On the bottom they'd signed only with the letter R. It wasn't Ruth's. I didn't correct them. Later that evening, I pulled up the email draft I had written weeks ago and never sent. The subject line was blank. The body had only one sentence. "I would like to legally change my surname to Merriman." I pressed send. There was no ceremony to it, no announcement. Just a quiet re-entry into the name of someone who saw me not as obligation, but as origin. The gallery opening happened a month later. Not many people knew the date. I didn't send invitations. Word had drifted through the neighborhood slowly like warm air through a cracked window. By 7, the front room had filled. No decorations, no speeches, just soft light chairs that didn't match, and a wall of work that bore no signatures. One piece hung in the center, a painting acrylic on canvas, titled in pencil, "The Coat." It was the one I had draped over Ruth that day in the rain. I had found it weeks later, washed and folded in a drawer beneath her desk, smelling faintly of cedar and something older like clay left too long in a sealed box. I hadn't planned to paint it, but my hands remembered its shape before I knew I'd started. It wasn't grand, just a coat still damp at the edges, hung on a wooden peg, no one inside it, no movement, just waiting. By 8, the crowd thinned. Then they arrived. Stephanie stood near the back, arms crossed tightly flanked by Claire. Margaret wore her church coat, the one she used for holidays, the lapel stiff with starch. None of them spoke. They looked at the piece titled "The Coat." Stephanie squinted at the small placard beneath it, then turned her head slightly. "I don't think it's about you," Claire murmured. "No." Stephanie replied, "She never makes it about anyone but herself." They remained near the wall for 10 minutes, then closer to the exit, then in line waiting. I didn't move toward the door. Adira stood near the counter, running her fingers along the base of a ceramic lamp a teenager had sculpted with uneven ribs. "She's not going to open the door." Claire let out a faint breath somewhere between scoff and sigh. She always did think silence meant virtue. "No," Adira said. "She just stopped translating." They left without saying goodbye. I returned to the wall and adjusted a frame that sat slightly askew. Inside it, a print someone had given me anonymously. 3 open hands palm up. No text. I moved it half an inch to the right. Later that night, I swept the floors myself. Not because I had to, because I wanted to feel each crack in the tile. I left the lights on as I moved from room to room, not in search of anything, just letting the space settle into itself. In the drawer beside the counter, the manila envelope remained unopened. I knew what it said. You have been removed as a beneficiary, probably followed by a signature, a date, maybe a vague clause to cushion it. I didn't read it. Instead, I wrote one sentence in my notebook: I do not return. I didn't mean to the will, or the family dinners, or the forgotten birthdays that were never really forgotten, only unmarked. I meant to the version of myself that once waited at the edge of things hoping to be remembered, the version who circled rooms without sound, who made offerings without price, who stayed just in case. That door had closed with no slam, no scream, just a quiet hand placing a key on the table and stepping out. Now I stood in a space I had swept with my own hands, hung with pieces that bore no names, visited by people who didn't ask who I used to be, and I let the envelope stay where it was, unopened, untouched, not because I feared its words, but because I no longer needed them to confirm what I already understood. Some inheritances are removed in ink, others are reclaimed in silence. I no longer wait for anyone to knock. The kettle clicked off with a soft sound, the kind you only notice when everything else is still. I didn't rush to pour. The mint leaves had dried in the jar beside the window weeks ago, curled and dark but fragrant when touched by steam. I used a spoon with a bent handle, the same one Ruth kept in a drawer, marked almost. I folded the linen cloth slowly, smoothing out each seam. It had been patched together from leftover fabric, some too stiff, others too thin, but the edges met now. The stitches weren't perfect, but they were mine. The room didn't need music. Sunlight touched the rim of the ceramic bowl near the front door, the same one with the hairline crack running through its side. No one had tried to fix it. It sat beneath the windowsill like a whisper that never needed raising. The air smelled faintly of clay and dried citrus. I moved through the studio the way one might walk through memory carefully without retelling it. Each object had its place not by symmetry but by weight. The shelves weren't level, the brushes didn't match, but nothing felt waiting. I opened my laptop. A message from Addie Cooper rested in my inbox, untouched since winter. I think this is the first place someone heard me. No signature. Just that line. I read it once and closed the screen. Some things don't need replies. On the wall beside the back table, Ruth's handwriting remained untouched. I never traced over it. Just sealed the corner with clear wax to keep it from fading. Kindness, given quietly, is power, returned in peace. She hadn't told me what to do with that sentence. She just wrote it in pencil, as if temporary things could still hold permanence. The phone hadn't rung in days. Or maybe it had. I stopped keeping the ringer on. The absence didn't sting anymore. It just made space. A woman stepped through the door around midday. She didn't say her name. Her coat had paint on the cuffs. She walked without urgency. Her hand hovered over a clay tumbler I had placed by the entrance weeks ago. She didn't lift it. Who made this? A person who used to believe they had nothing worth offering. She nodded once. Didn't compliment. Didn't linger. But I didn't need her to. After she left, I dusted the small wooden chair by the front window. One leg wobbled. I didn't fix it. Some things stay honest in their imbalance. The sky turned without warning. The studio dimmed slightly, but not enough to light the lamp. I sat by the large work table and traced a pencil along the rim of a shallow bowl I had thrown 2 days before. Not to measure it, just to feel its shape. There was no deadline now. No need to submit, prove, compare. The projects moved because my hands did. I opened the drawer near the far wall. Beneath the box of sealing wax and unused name tags, I found the folded handkerchief. The thread was uneven. My grandmother had stitched it decades ago. The fabric had softened from time. There was a faint stain in the corner that never came out. I placed it on the tea table beside the window. Not as an heirloom, just as something that had always known how to remain. The wind moved outside, but the glass didn't rattle. Sometimes at this hour, Ruth used to hum while cleaning brushes. I could almost hear it again, not in sound, but in the stillness she left behind. Her absence never felt sharp, only exact. I lifted the teacup. The glaze had pooled slightly at the base, giving it a lopsided weight. It didn't match the saucer beneath it, but it held heat well. My hands rested around it without thinking. The room no longer held the echo of other voices. No one telling me how to improve, how to scale, how to make the most of this. No one saying my name wrong, or not at all. No messages asking if I'd considered coming back. No guilt folded into concern. No one saying, "You've made your point, Sadie." The silence wasn't heavy anymore, just wide. I didn't glance toward the envelope. It had stayed buried beneath tax papers and old grant drafts. I knew it was still there, but I no longer opened drawers looking for confirmation. The sign by the front door said simply, "Open when you are." Some read it as instruction, others as invitation. For me, it was both. A girl came last week, barely 16, hair too short for the season. She didn't look up much, only pressed her thumb into the center of wet clay again and again, as if trying to reach something that didn't want to be found. She stayed the whole hour, didn't speak. Before leaving, she placed her piece on the drying shelf, turned to me and said, "I didn't think it'd feel okay to shape something again." I hadn't asked for her story. She didn't owe it. But the bowl she left behind, unschwad, lopsided hollow, had edges that held. That night, I sat with the door unlocked. Not to wait. Just because I didn't feel the need to guard the light anymore. I used to think I had to shrink to fit the hollow space they left behind. Now, I open the window every morning, brew tea, and sometimes let the steam rise without drinking it. No one calls my name in this house, but I'm still here, and for the first time I understand that I don't need to be remembered to be real.